all of it kept coming back to our relationship with land and how that can be such a source of cultural transformation, of deeper connection with this larger ecosystem that we're a part of.
Welcome to The Regeneration Will Be Funded. This is a show about regenerative finance, exploring pathways to a life-affirming economy. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and today's guest is Neha Sharma. Neha is a co-founder of the Center for Ethical Land Transition, a group exploring ways to decommodify and increase land accessibility, especially for BIPOC communities. I've been seeing multiple threads lead back to this group, including campaigns around land back, rematriation, reparations, rights of nature, ultimately coalescing into what Neha refers to as the land justice movement. In this discussion, Neha walks us through the history of the organization, some of the groups they've been supporting, and anchors us through a compass metaphor that orients the center's activities. It's noticeable how many partnerships and relationships the center has across the ecosystem, which I think is a beautiful reflection of their approach. As we all know, land is at the heart of our economic system, our relationship with nature, social issues like equity and governance, and so much more. I hope this conversation stimulates something for you. So let's dive right in with Neha Sharma. We are here today with Neha Sharma. She is the co-founder of the Center for Ethical Land Transition. Welcome, Neha.
Hi, great to be here.
Land transition, what is this referring to?
Well, let's start with our relationship with land. I think it's profound that we're actually recording this on Earth Day. Every day is Earth Day. But we are in a very interesting scenario today. We are living with the reality that a lot of the ways in which we relate to land are actually quite noisy structures that have led to a lot of issues. From an agriculture, land stewardship point of view, we've shifted to monoculture, which has resulted in soil degradation and less nutrient-dense food. And IPCC reports can tell you that things are not going towards a great trend. Industrialization essentially relates to land as a commodity and something that can be sold and extracted from. Mm-hmm. And there are ways in which ownership has really upheld these systems of oppression. And there's a felt sense that I think a lot of us have today that here, especially on Turtle Island, but across the planet, things aren't really working out well for the benefit of the whole. But also, if it's helpful to hear some facts, in the 1400s, we had the doctrine of discovery. In the 1800s, we have the Indian Removal Act, the Dawes Act, and the Homestead Act, all of which forcibly removed original inhabitants of this land and sold this land to other people. And in the 1900s, we have the GI Bill, which guaranteed wealth for veterans, but also gave banks the opportunity to discriminate against our Black relatives. Mm. And then we also have the Federal Aid Highway Act, which put highways directly through Black and brown neighborhoods. So there are many ways in which inequality and injustice has been institutionalized here. And it has created this great unbalance across the board. And we are seeing ways in which there's intergenerational wealth hoarding, causing a huge disparity amongst many of us, and just explicit dispossession and disconnection from land. And, you know, if all of those facts and historical things speak to you, great. But there are also ways in which this is so deeply felt culturally and emotionally and spiritually. And in many ways, the ways we have been severed from land has also resulted in us being severed from each other, not having this deep connection. And we have such a beautiful opportunity being alive today. We are in the middle of what some people call the just transition, moving from extractive economies to regenerative economies. My friend Amanda Joy Ravenhill, calls it the awkward era. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to have to think outside of the box. We can't default to status quo. And there are ways in which this moment is really pushing us to our edges to be more innovative about how we relate to each other, about how we relate to land. And it's a bit of an intersectional mess. And I, have dabbled in several different chapters, all of which have examined our relationship with land and the more than human beings that are a part of this planet. And, whether it be grassroots nonprofits or energy efficiency in commercial buildings to equitable and diverse renewable energy sources, all of it kept coming back to our relationship with land and how that can be such a source of cultural transformation, of deeper connection with this larger ecosystem that we're a part of. And I think there's, people now have more words for it. It's intersectional. It's an interdisciplinary way of approaching this kind of crunchy situation we've gotten ourselves into. And there are many different levers that we can touch on. Land seems to be at the root of a lot of them. And in this really pivotal moment that we're in, we're seeing a lot of recent reckonings, a much larger acknowledgement of ways that we've caused imbalance. The Vatican recently repudiated the doctrine of discovery. California has a reparations task force. There is this awakening happening. There is a huge desire to not only think about these in ideological fantasy ways, but to actually look at the tools and the systems that exist today and see how we can breathe new life into them. How can we use systems as shapeshifters to create the more just world we want to be a part of? So, my preference is to focus on the present and where we're going in the future, but it is important to acknowledge some of the missteps that happened along the way that got us to what we're working with today. It's just a little bit of the clay on the table that we've got.
Yeah. We live in a context, right? And if we don't understand the history of that context and how that context has come to be, how are we possibly equipped to collectively respond and appropriately respond to the situation that we're in? And what I hear from you is, pointing at the myriad of social, historical injustices and issues that underpin our current context and relationship to land, in addition to the fact that we have, an ecological crisis, and that land is really at the root of so much of our relationship with the non-human world, the more than human world. And yeah, to me, the revolution upon us has to get down to this level, down to the level of even this notion that we own the land, right? Like, what are we talking about here? What is land even itself? So I'm excited to untangle, and we won't possibly get all the answers on the table in an hour, but my research and inquiries in these realms have continued to keep leading a lot of threads back to Center for Ethical Land Transition. And so excited to speak with you. Can you share what is this Center for Ethical Land Transition and how did it come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. We found ourselves here in a really beautiful way. we did not necessarily set out and say, this is what we're going to do. But Cassandra Lynn Ferreira, co-founder, co-director, incredibly brilliant, radical real estate agent, has been working with groups for decades. And we had just been in ongoing inquiry, trying to really understand how we could use our roles and positionalities to bring more balance into this world, but to also innovate in a way that feels more in integrity. And it was about 2020, 2021, those blurry times. And we found ourselves with Erica Jennings of Green Key Real Estate working on this project where we got to help be facilitators of land being reunited. And we thought, this is beautiful. What an incredible opportunity of these, title holders recognizing that they want to give land back, and how beautiful that we get to be in this moment of reuniting. And also, this might just be a one-off. This is great. We're going to learn so much. And we were really humbled to witness that one project turned into 3, turned into 5, turned into more than we could possibly handle. And, Bayo Komolafe has this incredible quote that I think many of us love to come back to. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. And as we were seeing the abundance of opportunities for transformation show up in front of us, we took a moment to pause and exhale and say, okay, wait, what is this moment asking of us right now? And this moment of this movement that perhaps doesn't even have a name yet, is it the land justice movement? We're still understanding the shape of this, but it's requiring us to be multifaceted, multidimensional, multilingual in the ways that we use our tools or the ways that we connect with each other. And thus the Center for Ethical Land Transition was born, not without the encouragement of many different ecosystem collaborators, Sustainable Economies Law Center, so many other folks, Movement Generation, have been profound mirrors for us, saying, no, there's actually a place here, and we need a place to come to understand, okay, hey, great, I want to give land back. Where do I start? What does it mean to rematriate? How do we navigate stolen people on stolen land? Shelterwood often refers to that phrase. And as the catalyst project of Center for Ethical Land Transition, Shelterwood is a phenomenal example of bringing together Black, Indigenous, queer, differently abled folks who sometimes refer to themselves as stolen people on stolen land, but are still trying to be in right relationship with the place that they have found themselves in. And we show up as facilitators, space holders, relational connectors. We don't have a formula or checkbox process for how to approach these things. There is a way in which deep listening and presence is required for every single project. Whether we are returning land to the Indigenous peoples of that place, or we are returning land to, Black and Indigenous multicultural groups, there's no way we could possibly predict how things are going to unfold, but we can commit to continue to showing up amidst the uncertainty. So what we can provide are translations with the systems or the colonial ways of contracts and all of the paperwork required. We can also show up, and we like to have land listening sessions where we just go and sit with the land before we even try to project what our vision for that land is. part of this is just being present before going into a document and coming up with a plan.
Yeah. So what I hear from you is that you're witness to all of these different threads coming together, and there is this call for this scaffolding to support this movements, and Center for Ethical Land Transitions kind of starting to provide some of those translation services, whilst recognizing that every place and situation and context is different. And so there's not necessarily a rule book or a recipe book or a checklist that does all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine you are orienting yourselves and structuring the organization, and have grounded in some ways. So can you share more about how you make sense of it so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So while we don't have that recipe book, we have a compass to help us orient. And in the North, our, guiding star is right relationship with land.
Mm.
And this is where rights of nature lives, where worldviews lived, paradigm shifts, different cosmologies for how to relate to land. And much more than a statement, this is an inquiry. This is a commitment to being in right relationship with land.
Mm.
We are in progress. We're in process. We all are. We are on this learning evolution, wondering how to be in right relationship with land.
Mm.
And the North is where we just continue to come back to understand that there are ways that we are constantly informing what that North Star looks like.
I love it. It's more of a journey than a destination. There's always a north, right? It's not an end point.
Exactly. And sort of grounding the North is the South. So on the other side of the axis is the ecosystem of practitioners. And this refers to all of the real estate agents, the legal practitioners, facilitators who are taking a solidarity and justice approach to the work that they're doing today. Again, we don't want to just continue to imagine this as a dream. We want this to be our today. So how can we help the Winnemem-Wintu today be back in relationship with their land? How are we navigating the real estate agency process, perhaps removing commission from the table and actually having a pool of resources that go back to the stewards of the land? Or how are we employing legal innovation? What does it mean to have entities such as unincorporated associations with church status, or a land trust, or conservation easements, cultural easements? All of the myriad of ways that we can be really creative in the legal sphere today, not just for tomorrow, but all of the work that's happening on the ground there, and even the emotional and somatic facilitators who are a huge part of this. They are informing what it means to be guided in the North as well. So there's a feedback loop happening there. And we're just really appreciative of all of the practitioners who have sort of come out of the woodwork to say, wait, that there's a way that I can actually leverage my expertise and find the others who really want to sit in this inquiry as well. It's been really humbling for us to see how many other people are just excited about that.
Right.
And then on the other side, the East and the West, the sunrise and the sunset. In the West, we have relinquishment. And that is working with title holders to understand what it means to relinquish land. And there are some sort of cultural reframes that we can have here. We've heard the terms land back, which in some ways can have this connotation of like, okay, here, take this back. I'm going to go away now. And I wonder if we can actually reframe that as relinquishment of entitlement, but moving towards collective stewardship, being in deeper communion with each other and the land. And not just like the closing of more fences, of more gates, but just the tearing down of those and welcoming more people into deeper connection with each other and the land. So we've learned a lot working with title holders, and I'll go into more depth with relinquishment and what it's like to be working with title holders. But on the other side of the axis in the east, in the sunrise, we have reunion. I think you and I know that this is so much more than just a signature on a title paperwork. This is an intergenerational, somatic, emotional, like profound experience that people and the more than human beings are going through when they're being reunited with land, with their culture, with their language, with the places that their ancestors have walked and sat around the fire and sung songs. It's a very, very multidimensional process. And we can't just sign this paperwork and then walk away. We actually need to be in the deep presence of what it is to be reunited and support that process of reunion as well. So relinquishment and reunion kind of go hand in hand and are constantly informing each other. And then the North and the South are also constantly informing each other. And it all goes around. All of our projects sit sort of differently and in multiple places, but that's how we orient ourselves. That's what we go towards.
Nice. Yeah, beautiful. I love this compass, and it's simple but clear, and it's such a beautiful way to guide the work, I imagine. Yeah, when you mentioned this frame of land back, I was reminded of the work that Culture Hack Labs has been doing, and they just did this, kind of narrative hack and examining that, and where they got to was land back to right relations, to kind of extend and try to bring that awareness and that emphasis on where you have pointed your North Star, which is that this is really about right relationship for everyone involved, and right relationship to the more than human world. And how do we even think about ownership, of course, is part of that context. Yeah, my own journey with this work is predominantly characterized by the farm where I live in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And my brother and I bought that farm several years ago using the proceeds of a startup that we sold in Silicon Valley. And, we're not from New Zealand. So already you're entangled in all of these paradoxes of buying land in a place that you're not from, that has a history. And, we think with the best of intentions to transform this dairy farm that had been, the industrial farming practices and all of the negative consequences that were accruing with that. But it never felt right to own a lot of land. And I really, it was a very uncomfortable journey of the projection that people would have, across the spectrum. Like isn't it amazing? Look what you've done. I'm like, this is not we're helping steward it. You realize it's a big job. It's a lot of work and responsibility. And yeah, we're proud that we're doing our part, but or of course, just the projection that you get of wealthy landholder, and so, yeah, that kind of took us on a multi-year journey of trying to figure out how do we want to relate to this piece of land? And my experience is that the systems that we have are, it's possible to innovate, but the defaults are all kind of pushing you to a specific way, starting with the registry, the owner name, that's how we're organizing, and the rights that governments have over the land, even doesn't really match what ownership and property rights originally intended. When we pay tax on that land, there's certain things we can do, we can't do, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, ultimately, where we landed is that we now co-steward that land inside of a charitable trust, and that ensures that the aims of the trust are honored in perpetuity,
Right.
and so that there can't be private profit benefit from the sale of that land or whatnot, and that allows us to then focus on, well, okay, what does that stewardship of that trust look like? Who are
Right.
those stakeholders, and what are our processes and governance and kind of, and I think putting the emphasis to that is so beautiful. We still get times where people are like, refer to us as the landowners. And so I see that it's like this long-term journey. But the shift, I would say, energetically has been like, I far prefer this structure and the ways of relating to it than where we were before. And obviously it was privileged enough where I could do that financially, so to speak, and not rely on the equity ownership of the land for my livelihood. But it's quite possible. And I would just say, like, it creates a container in our context to bring more people into the collective stewardship,
Exactly.
which is the whole goal, right? Like, I don't want to be responsible for all of the things that need to happen. Like, I want to inspire the imagination of our community to have pride and a collective sense of ownership in the right way that word can be used, of taking care of this place and having a relationship to this place. And this place will still be here when we are long gone. So anyway, I just kind of offer that up as context and curious what that provokes for you.
Yeah. It's such a great example. And one day I hope that we can actually flip the script here and interview you more.
Only if you come out to the farm.
Oh, done. Easy. I love those lands so much. But yeah, it's quite a journey. And actually what it reminds me of is the rights of nature framework, which I won't go into too deeply in our time together because you've already spoken with Global Alliance of Rights of Nature and Earth Law Center. And it's such a beautiful, blossoming area of practice. And I bring this in because rights of nature as a phrase can be somewhat confusing or confounding. And in our Sacred Contract Right of Nature program, we use a guardianship model. So through Center for Ethical Land Transition, we have a project called Sacred Contract, where we're actually taking title holders through a cohort program of what it means to be in sacred contract and have there be a collective guardianship of that land. And this includes creating a story tapestry of what has that land been through, what are the stories that soil holds. It also includes reconciliation, repair, if there are any ways that there need to be acknowledgement of harm or just reparative spaces that we can name things in and then move toward deeper connection. And another aspect of it is guardianship, listening to the land, acknowledging what that ecosystem wants and needs, and then being accountable to that. And a key phrase here is also in perpetuity. And one can utilize cultural easements, conservation easements, or rights of nature easements. But in our program, we use rights of nature easements. While it's still a tool in this dominant paradigm that uses lots of paperwork, one gift of it is that it moves beyond just the people who are living there. It is a commitment in perpetuity to the land. The land holds that commitment. The people don't hold it to that. So there are so many ways in which, it's actually quite simple.
Totally.
Just shift from this individualistic lens, which, as you mentioned, is quite a bit of responsibility. Things are more fun when we do them together. Why not also apply that to this model?
Yeah, I love that. And I have heard the rights of nature movement referred to as voices of nature as well. And I think partly because of this recognition that once you have this kind of legal structure of recognizing nature as its own person or having rights, you still need humans to voice the needs and to be that set of translators and to help steward and be guardians of that body of nature. So people can check out our many interviews and inquiries in that space. But I want to get back to the center, and can you walk us through some examples and maybe some of the projects that you've been excited about?
Yeah, definitely. And it'll be, I'll have to curb my enthusiasm here because we could be chatting about these for another 3 hours. They're all so unique. I am going to share at a high level about a few of the projects we have served. And these are all complex, long-term projects that others on our team are much more hands-on with. And I'll just offer a sprinkling of the different archetypes or patterns that exist. So I shared a little bit about Shelterwood up on Kashaya and Pomo land. Really beautiful project, such a profound catalyst for the work that we've been doing. And there's ways in which we've been working with the Winnemem Wintu, for years, just being in relationship, just having a better understanding of what they want, what they need, what their stories are, how they relate to the lands and the waters that they're tending to up there. And that was many years that it wasn't quite obvious what we are here to do together. But it really allowed us to deepen relationship with them, to also have a better understanding of their relations and their stories. And we spent years building trust with the Winnemem, supporting their rematriation journey as their real estate strategist, when appropriate, their agent, which has led to multiple types of strategies and reacquisitions, including the very notable 1,100 acres on Bear Mountain. And that is just a story that exemplifies what happens when you just show up and continue the conversation without expectation. Just a desire to show up and be in service. And there are other ways in which we're also working with the market in confusing ways. So just to go a layer deeper on how some of these things happen. Sometimes we're aware of land that is going to go on the market. And I say that in quotations intentionally because that is a part of this capitalist paradigm where land can be a commodity and sold and extracted from. And there's this urgency that happens when land goes on the market.
Right.
If it doesn't go on the market, sometimes we can just actually refer to or lean on the relationships that we have with our neighbors, knowing that something might happen. Perhaps these title holders actually hope for something really beautiful to happen there. They don't need to default to going on the market. So there's a spattering of that happens throughout our projects, whether we are publicly fundraising for land that is on the market or not. And, it's always painful to say it in those phrases and terms, but also to ground it in today's language.
Totally.
It happens in a myriad of ways. It can be funded through crowdfunding campaigns. We can have project-specific funding from wealth holders who want to redistribute their resources. So many different ways that it can happen. Another example I feel called to share is our Somos Tierra Campesino project in Northern California, where we get to work with Latinx farm workers on what is called culturally affirmative title holding. So if we are to work in the systems and entities that exist today, how can we understand the most culturally affirmative way to represent that on paperwork? how do these Latinx farm workers and indigenous peoples want to be in relationship with each other, with the land, and how do they want that to show up on paperwork? That is a conversation. That's, again, not something we can necessarily predict. And there are many different players involved in this project as well. And another really beautiful example of how things can happen in collaboration and within different collectives coming together is Sogorea Land Trust and Movement Generation. So in Bay Miwok land, we were able to return 43 acres as a part of a collaboration with Sogorea Land Trust and Movement Generation. Now, this is beautiful because it's an example of multicultural solidarity, where we have Black communities and our indigenous communities coming together to be in right relationship with land. And these 43 acres, Sogorea Land Trust, are also now home to Movement Generation's Justice and Ecology Center. So this is a way in which we can, as I share that, I can just feel the ways in which that land has been liberated and welcomed in all these different people who hold different identities and stories, yet want to come together and be united in solidarity through justice and ecology. And they are using the tools and systems and use this opportunity to demonstrate that in a really profound way. And I think we're really lucky to be able to witness that sort of solidarity. And that project was, I have to call in Xavier Freedom, an incredible real estate agent who we got to work with, and Center for Ethical Land Transition. And a lot of these things, we can speak the language of real estate agency or the legal innovation, but we get to hold a lot of the facilitation space and actually leverage our positionality in ways that empower or protect people when there might be relations that are in tension as well.
Yeah, these can be very, I imagine, like emotionally charged or sensitive topics and discussion spaces between all of these different stakeholders. So it makes a lot of sense that there is this opening and this role for an organization like yours that can be a convener, can be a community of practice, an expert. And in hearing you speak to these examples and also how I've come across the work, it's noticeable how many different partners and networks and organizations that you're in relationship with. And it's also noticeable as you speak of how much emphasis on listening, relationality, trust building, not even knowing how things are going to unfold, but first prioritizing that part of the work, the being in relationship part of the work. And I'm guessing those two thoughts, one having a lot of different partnerships and collaborations and weaving networks, and the other of this approach. It's not a coincidence. This is very much. I'm wondering if you could speak to that dynamic a bit more, maybe any more about that philosophy.
Yeah. This is something I feel particularly passionate about. How can we not accidentally default to siloed ways of being? That in itself is an act of, revolution, to just transparently do all of these things and invite people in. I don't think that many of us have been conditioned to do it in that way. And we are only as strong as all of our relationships. And it's imperative that we are able to support each other in this ecosystem. It's imperative that, I sort of live in the South, the convene the ecosystem part of our work, where I get to bring in the different practitioners, ensure that we're not, accidentally duplicating efforts, or that we're able to share in our learnings as well. How can we have learning spaces for this work that hasn't really been done before.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we confidently yet vulnerably show up and share our stories and continue to live in what I call the same knowledge landscape, the same knowledge scape?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a movement happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moment. Agrarian Trust has said 400 million acres of farmland are about to switch stewardship in this decade and the next.
Mm-hmm.
This is a profound opportunity we have to reimagine and realign, our integrity spine with each other, with the land. 98% of all landowners are white folks.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many ways in which this is so obviously unjust. And let's do what we can today. Let's not wait for something to happen tomorrow or some policy to be enforced or
Mm-hmm.
who knows what. We get to work with some of the most brilliant, fun, revolutionary, ongoingly evolving folks. Everything I've said today is it's not the blueprint. Everything that we're learning is not the exact recipe. If we are doing this well, we will have a new evolved story tomorrow. We will have better instruments and tools that help us guide us to be in right relationship.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have more organizations and more folks showing up to this. Everyone is a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, all things are rooted in our relationship with land, and it's intersectional. We have multidimensional levers available to us.
Yeah, I'm hearing from a lot of folks that we've been interviewing the term relational economy,
Mm-hmm.
Or relationship economy, and placing the emphasis on relationships rather
Mm-hmm.
than a financial economy. And so this really is resonant with those themes and that language. And also just this shift of that conditioning you mentioned to organizational logical forms into movement logic.
Mm-hmm.
And, like kind of that shift is really important. We can still wear our organizational logos on our hats and, represent different roles and so forth. But it's really that paradigm shift of being far more collaborative, open, in solidarity rather than in silos and kind of trying to compete with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're all in this together.
Yeah.
So what are the big challenges now? What's ahead? Here we are, Earth Day 2024.
Mm-hmm.
What's on top for you?
Well, first, I just feel so grateful to be able to get to do this work every day. And it feels so deeply nourishing in my bones. And I feel inclined to also just bring in and name the rest of the team that I get to work with every day. Cassandra Lynn for our incredible, radical real estate agent and brilliant visionary, and Jason Patton, who does so much for our organization and can so beautifully articulate the patterns that he witnesses in the relinquishment side of things. And Abby Huff, who has such a deep awareness of the somatics and brings her wisdom to the reunion side of things and holds it so, so beautifully. And I just, it would be remiss if I went through this whole hour and didn't bring them into this space with us. It's only the four of us.
Wow, it's a lot of work for four of you.
Yeah, we're wearing multiple hats. Every day, also trying to just breathe into our own medicine of not accidentally defaulting to this hustle paradigm when there is so much beautiful work to be doing. We do have to just really pause and have great discernment about how we can have the most heartfelt ways of breathing life into the systems that we want to create. And there is a lot happening right now. it's hard to know exactly what is the one thing that would make the biggest difference. But one thing that feels incredibly clear is that people are ready. We are ready. The animals are ready. The plants are ready. We are seeing way more headlines today around rematriation, reparations than ever before. And we need more practitioners who can meet this moment and help be the doulas in this land justice movement. And we also just need more resources and infrastructure that can help hold us through this awkward era, through this transition that we're in. There are cultural resources that could be incredibly beneficial right now. So Culture Hack Labs is doing a great job of this. So much of this is cultural. It's the narrative. It's the reframings of what it means to have private ownership and how that asserts dominance and perpetuates oppression in different ways. All of these things are incredibly helpful. And there are ways in which more resources are required to also nourish this movement so that we can do work in ways that feels spacious.
And so Center for Ethical Land Transition, how are you as an organization structured legally?
We're a nonprofit fiscally sponsored by Commonweal, who are just such fantastic partners.
And so your expenses are covered through grants coming into the organization?
Yeah, we've had the benefit of just having such incredibly aligned funders, both for our core funding and unrestricted funds, but also several of our projects, the land transition projects, are funded by foundations or different partners. There are several different ways to resource the work that we are doing. In this year, we are more actively seeking more core unrestricted funds so that we can continue to build up the resources that we see are required for the movement infrastructure for the land justice movement.
Curious, are there any reflections you have about the philanthropic space and about funders and foundations and their appetite for this work?
So again, I think Center for Ethical Land Transition has been super lucky in that we've been working with incredibly radical funders who seem to really understand why this is important. And we as an organization are in our own sort of growth edge of talking about resources and speaking about this to more mainstream audiences and sharing our work through to one more circle wider. And there's a lot of talk about trust-based philanthropy and funding this movement. And we are actually humbled to see how much interest there is by more mainstream funders. And there's still a learning journey that people need to go through. I mean, if we're to look at the compass itself, the act of relinquishment and reunion is a part of funding this movement as well. And all of the intergenerational wealth that has been accumulated, it almost seems like these wings are stretching out to understand how to redistribute resources in the best way. I'm humbled. I feel encouraged. I feel enthusiastic, and I'm also feeling aware that there's a learning journey that the funder movement is also going through.
Yeah, well, let's take that journey together, and Ma Earth will be here for it, and we'll continue to have discussions and be watching your journey, Neha, with great interest. Are there any other key messages you'd like to share or closing thoughts?
So fun to talk for an hour about the things that I think we both are so passionate about. And I would just really encourage folks to be in deeper inquiry about the place that they live in. Perhaps with each step that you take, try to actually go on a time travel journey, maybe dig deep beneath that concrete or that asphalt and feel into the different stories that live in each layer of soil. Maybe what are the songs that were sung, what trees were growing, what animals were wandering through, and see how that can be brought to life again today together. How can we tap into the guidance of that which is ancient and also our guiding light for the future? Yeah.
Neha Sharma, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being here and listening and creating a space for us to share stories. It's really beautiful.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Neha. To learn more about the Center for Ethical Land Transition, go to centerelt.org. You can also find links in the show notes to some of the projects that Neha mentioned in our discussion. For more conversations like this one, go to maearth.com. We invite you to subscribe and share this video to help us get the word out. We are here to elevate voices in the regenerative economy space like Neha. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.